Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics, and I woke up this morning, a bit of a surprise. I found that Kane, who's a very close advisor for Boris Johnson, very loyal advisor, has resigned after a bit of a bout of infighting at the top of government. Now, I'll get on to sort of who he is and why this resignation alone is, I suppose, good news for a particular faction. But what is of real interest is that it represents a major loss of influence and power for Dominic Cummings. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, at the start of the week, well, even yesterday, last time I checked, which was not very late into the night, admittedly, but last time I checked, the news was very much about Cain, Johnson's Director of Communications, who was to be promoted to becoming the Prime Minister's next Chief of Staff. Now, that really would have focused Cummings's power. And, Cain worked closely with Cummings during the Brexit referendum, all very, very close, and very much part of the Vote Leave clique that now has its claws in government. And he's also the one, blamed for an awful lot of the miscommunication regarding COVID. For example, constantly changing government advice from go to work, you lazy beggars, to stay at home, you idiots, what are you doing, you're spreading the virus. And, not really a ringing endorsement for someone who has the word communication in their job title. Now, of course, Boris Johnson was ultimately responsible for these policies, and I would argue even a child could have seen the problem with such an inconsistent message, but we know that Johnson can't actually be bothered to think about anything, and so he lets others come up with his policy decisions for him. Now, Cain, like I said, was to be made Chief of Staff. My take on this is that it would have represented a doubling down of Cummings's influence. Very similar. In fact, my initial thoughts were very much like what Donald Trump is doing in America. The orange one is on his way out, but by replacing all of his senior defence staff in an attempt to consolidate a power base that won't exist in a few months. And it seemed to be very similar for Johnson. When I say Johnson, what I actually mean is Dominic Cummings. Because I don't know what Dominic Cummings really thinks about the immediate future, of course not. But I do know the following. One, Dominic Cummings wants to reform the civil service. Now, when you put it like that, there are quite a lot of people who believe that the civil service is absolutely due for reform. They're not entirely convinced, as am I, that Dominic Cummings is the person to improve it. And the way he's doing it is absolutely, definitely wrong. There is no strategy. It's a shoot from the hip approach that is completely tearing the system down. He does have a vague idea about the improvements he'd like to see. And, I've read them and you look at them and you go, yeah, absolutely. But the way he's doing it is not going to deliver those improvements. We are in the midst of the huge complexities of both Brexit and the COVID pandemic. And you could argue now is not a time to be making major reforms of the civil service anyway. We need the civil service to be able to help things run. Yes, politicians come up with policy ideas. It's the civil service who need to implement them into some working shape. And in the middle of all this, Cummings is tearing apart what was one of the most respected civil service operations in the world. And I say was because, of course, there have been some major bollocks dropped in the last year since the Vote Leave crew really got themselves involved, forcing out the most senior and experienced of the civil servants in favour of yes men. So now what you've got, constantly becoming, filling the most senior positions of the civil servant, you've not only got people who don't really know what they're doing, but also people who are not really of a mind when they do know what they're doing to tell ministers, because it's created a culture of fear where if a minister says a thing, oh, we need to do this thing, and you say, actually, that's a really stupid idea, in more diplomatic language, then you're seen as a naysayer. They're not interested in that. They only want optimistic people. So now officials are afraid to tell ministers about the consequences of ill thought out policies. And we've seen the results of that this year. We've seen the results of it. But Cummings has not been deterred, and he flits from government department to government department, smashing it up before moving on to the next. Conservative MPs have been more than a little bit worried about this. I mean, they don't like him. They know that he has no regard for the Conservative Party, and what they worry about is that what he's doing is not going to help them win the next general election. Dominic Cummings doesn't care about that. He wants his reforms, and that's all there is to it. If the Conservatives lose the next general election as badly as Labour lost the last one, which is not realistic, but let's say, he doesn't care. He does not care if they don't get back into power for 50 years, as long as he gets his reforms. And they were really worried when he was given top-level security clearance to go visiting senior members of our intelligence services. What's he doing there, they were all asking. The second thing we know is that Boris Johnson is not going to be Prime Minister in the second half of next year. There's been lots of talk about him resigning. If he doesn't, then Tory rebels have made clear that they will actually get rid of him. And now that in itself wouldn't directly bother Cummings, so long as the post is filled by another vote leave stooge, and there are plenty of them who will back him like Johnson did. However, backbench MPs are not likely to accept that. It's quite reasonable to suppose that they will insist that any candidate that gets their backing has to make a cast iron guarantee that Cummings has gone. As soon as Johnson is replaced, Cummings goes with him. Simple as that. It may also be that the next favourite to succeed Johnson, Rishi Sunak, has no desire to keep Cummings on regardless of any external pressure. Sunak is a Brexiteer, don't get me wrong. He's not just one of these who knew it was extremely reckless to leave and just changed his tune for political purposes. He backs the campaign in 2016, but he wasn't part of the vote leave clique. Either way, I would find it incredible if Cummings has any confidence that he can be in place for more than another 6 months. He may have imagined he had a parliament to bring in his reforms. He's now looking like only having about half a year more at most. At most. Which means he would have to work extremely quickly to get his reforms done before being booted out, which means bring me the bigger smashing hammer, the wrecking ball, the JCB. And that, the haste, of course, is just going to make him more reckless. Unless, of course, he gets to the point where he thinks to himself, do you know what, I now can't do it in this amount of time, and just leaves, just goes. He may resign, he may follow Kane quite quickly. But at the moment, I've not seen anything that suggests that. Kane's appointment, when he was going to be made Chief of Staff, I took that as a consolidation of Cummings' power base and a vehicle towards him accelerating his plans. Get Kane in place. But then there was an almighty fight. Now, I don't know all the details, but apparently there were those close to Johnson, including his fiancée Carrie Symonds, who opposed Kane's promotion. Senior ministers were also involved. So Kane has stepped down. He can't be dealing with all the argy-bargy. Cummings has reportedly seen it as being forced out. So the story has switched within a matter of hours from a consolidation of Cummings' power and to an erosion of it. Now, certainly there are reports that some Conservative MPs are delighted by this turn of events. It does not surprise me at all. They do not want Cummings or anyone close to him in government. They're not at all impressed with the way that the government have been handling things. And when the government consistently gets so many things badly wrong, in fact, let's be honest, almost everything badly wrong. The only policies that have actually won any genuine plaudits this year have come out of the Treasury. It's nothing to do with Dominic Cummings. So in a situation like that, you have to look at the advisors around the Prime Minister and wonder why they are not only still there, but being given even more power and influence. Because I saw a quote in The Guardian from a Conservative MP that didn't name, saying, "A chance to get the old Boris back and out of the grip of these people," which is a commonly held, though completely inaccurate, view amongst many Conservative MPs. I think it's a defence mechanism because they overwhelmingly supported Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. They're now seeing the consequences of this awful decision. So they blame the advisors. Well, Boris has only been this crap since he started listening to them. It's very much the same thing because some other Conservative MPs instead talk about his COVID. Oh, he's still suffering from COVID. That's why he's crap now. No, he's crap before. Don't you remember? Boris Johnson has been listening to these guys, Dominic Cummings, Kane and so on, since 2016. And need I remind them that he was making all the same mistakes? Everything he's doing now as Prime Minister, all the cock-ups, was exactly what he was doing. He was being just as wasteful and bog useless when he was Mayor of London. That preceded his association with Cummings and gang by years. But, you know, to accept that is to accept that they gave the country a Prime Minister completely out of his depth at any time, let alone during actual once-in-a-century crises. They need to tell themselves that something out of their control, something something external, cocked it all up to preserve their egos. Not that we're going to see a significant improvement in the way government do things anytime soon. Kane is to be replaced by a former political editor of the Daily Mail. So, you know, two things. Someone who knows how to lie to the public is to take over Johnson's communication team. But also it's going to be a senior advisor who doesn't fundamentally know anything. This will be good news only for the Conservatives. But, you know, I suppose we'll all benefit eventually if it's the beginning of the end of Cummings, because even a chimpanzee could make better decisions than that. But we're still going to have people very, very close to the Prime Minister who have no level of expertise in actually dealing with problems, only how to spin things. So we're going to get the same basic situation where things get cocked up and the focus is not on improving the situation, dealing with the cock up. It's how do we spin this to avoid blame, or to at least minimise blame. It's out with one journalist and in with another. Cummings has lost a close ally, but he's still there. What this episode may indicate, of course, is that those close to government, but not part of the Vote Leave posse, are beginning to wrest control back. It may even show that when the time comes, in fact I expect it will, to get rid of Johnson. Because there are, as I say, quite a lot of MPs who, if Cummings would just go, take his people with him and just go, they'd give Johnson another crack. They'd give him more time. But he refuses to do that. He relies upon Cummings. So they accept that to get rid of Cummings, they have to get rid of Johnson. And that is what's delayed things, because they want Johnson until Brexit's sorted out. But, you know, it does look like when they're ready to press the nuclear button, remember, they're getting rid of Johnson only to get rid of Cummings. It does not seem feasible to me that they would allow Johnson to go and Cummings to stay. That's not happening. And of course, during all this bit of party politics, Labour have been pointing to the infighting as another example of the lack of focus of the government on the day when the UK became the first country in Europe to officially record 50,000 COVID deaths. So there we are, another little bit of drama in the Cummings saga. Still seems a nonsense to me that Cummings would still be in his position when absolutely no political faction in Parliament wants anything to do with him. He isn't just unpopular amongst opposition parties for screwing up our country with Brexit and our people with COVID. He's deeply unpopular with the Conservative Party, who appreciate his work on Brexit, but who see him as a driver towards the sort of polls that now have them behind Labour when they were way ahead. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.